Some women do not chase, and yet they are never forgotten. Not because of what they said, not because of what they gave, but because of what they refused to become when the moment demanded self-betrayal. And somewhere, in the quiet hour between dusk and night, a man stands before a mirror, not searching for her face, but meeting the parts of himself that only appeared after she was gone. He tells himself the story of strength, of independence, of control, yet the reflection does not echo the words. The ego prefers victory, prefers certainty, prefers the illusion of mastery, but the mirror answers only with silence. And silence has a way of dissolving the performances men build to survive their own longing. In Jungian language, this is the hour when the shadow begins to speak, when everything denied, avoided, and projected outward finally turns inward and demands recognition. The archetypal woman in this story was never loud. She did not beg, did not collapse, did not fight for a place she was already outgrowing. She existed with warmth, presence, and a dangerous kind of emotional steadiness. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to illusions. Because when someone carries emotional self-worth quietly, without performance, it activates something ancient in those who are still governed by unmet needs. He did not fall in love with her reality. He fell into his own projection. The anima, the inner feminine image, reached for her and wrapped her in meaning she never asked to carry. She became comfort, validation, safety, excitement, rescue, all without saying a word. And when she finally stepped back, not in anger but in clarity, the psyche did not register loss as romance. It registered collapse. This is where trauma enters the room, not with screaming, but with tightening. Attachment wounds are not loud. They are quiet panics dressed as indifference, sudden distance disguised as dignity, control pretending to be calm. When she detached, it did not feel like abandonment to the conscious mind. It felt like humiliation to the ego, and humiliation is the one emotion pride cannot metabolize. So the behavior shifted, messages delayed, affection rationed, attention turned into currency. Not because desire disappeared, but because the unconscious feared dependence more than loneliness. This is the first turning point, when longing is still present, but vulnerability becomes too dangerous to admit. And yet, the body knows. The nervous system keeps count even when pride rewrites the narrative. You may have felt this moment. When warmth turns inconsistent, when connection becomes conditional, when affection appears only when distance grows. Not because attraction faded, but because control felt safer than closeness. The mind may call it independence, but the psyche recognizes it as defense. Then comes the second turning point, quieter but heavier. The woman no longer waits. She does not chase clarity, does not argue for presence, does not negotiate for consistency. She turns inward, not in bitterness, but in reclamation. This is where individuation begins, where the feminine no longer orbits around being chosen, and instead returns to becoming whole. And that is when the mirror appears. Because without her emotional regulation, without her presence absorbing the weight of his unresolved fears, the psyche has nowhere left to project. What once lived in her reflection now returns to its original owner. The anxiety, the abandonment wound, the sense of not being enough. All the things once softened by her steadiness now echo in empty rooms. Stoic philosophy teaches that suffering is not caused by events, but by attachment to expectation. Yet trauma teaches that expectation forms before reason, long before language. The body remembers what the mind refuses to name. And in this mirror-lit silence, the man is no longer responding to her absence. He is responding to himself. This is the third turning point, the most dangerous and the most transformative, because some choose distraction, numbing, conquest, noise. Others stand still. Others finally see, and seeing is not gentle. Seeing is disorienting. Seeing dismantles the story of invincibility and replaces it with something far less flattering and far more honest. Meanwhile, the archetypal woman does not celebrate his realization. She does not wait for his awakening. She continues forward, not with resentment, but with refinement. Detachment does not harden her. It clarifies her. She begins to recognize that attraction is not sustained by sacrifice, and love is not proven through endurance of emotional instability. You may recognize this shift in yourself, the moment when hope turns into understanding, when effort turns into discernment, when the body finally relaxes because the heart is no longer negotiating with uncertainty. This is not emotional coldness. This is emotional maturity. The final turning point does not happen in conversation. It happens in consequence. He may reach out. He may hesitate. I wonder. But the dynamic has already shifted. Not because she withdrew affection, but because she withdrew identification. She no longer defines herself by whether she is chosen, missed, or desired. And this is where true power lives. Not in reaction, not in strategy, but in internal alignment. Jung would call this the movement toward the self, the moment when external validation no longer governs internal worth. Trauma, psychology, would call this nervous system safety. Stoicism would call this freedom from attachment to outcome. But the feminine knows it simply as peace. Back at the mirror, the reflection no longer accuses her. It interrogates him, not with cruelty, but with inevitability, because every unresolved pattern eventually meets itself. Every unhealed wound eventually demands attention, and no amount of distraction can outrun the quiet voice that asks why intimacy feels dangerous and absence feels intolerable. This story was never about making him spiral. It was about refusing to disappear in order to keep him comfortable. It was about choosing wholeness over proximity. It was about letting the shadow do its work without interrupting it with self-abandonment. And if the psyche truly changes, it will not be because someone stayed and suffered. It will be because someone left and lived. The woman who understands this does not chase closure. She does not demand recognition. She walks forward with the calm of someone who no longer needs to be seen to know her worth. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak. She simply sees more.